Okay, this is real simple. How should the State Board of Education boundaries be redrawn and redistricted?
Well, that's a good question. You know, we are sitting with only, trying to remember the number of state board members, but I think it's about 18 or 20. And we've got a state of 25 million people. So, pardon me?
There's
15, I'm sorry, 15. I thought it was 20. And so we've got a state of 25 million people. It's very difficult to do those more compact, but I will tell you that Senate District 8, which is the district that we're in, has a representative and has had a representative who has lived in College Station, and it's Brian, and it's very far away. And the communities of interest with the Collin County fast growth community and the interest that's going on down in Bryan College Station are vastly different. So that is absolutely unacceptable. And I think what we're going to see is trying to get more communities of interest in the State Board of Education. It's a tough thing to do, but we can do it.
I would just say fairly. That's how they should be drawn. Fairly.
Well, it's actually fair and legal. Those are the two words.
And I need to make one more amendment to the rules here. We're going to alternate from the left and right of the audience, and questioners, you can direct it to either candidate. If you don't, we'll assume it's for both candidates, but that's how we'll continue with this. So Andy, do you have someone on your side?
I do.
Yeah, hi. I'm John Barber, live in Parker. Mr. Shapiro, you said that you could postulate a constitutional amendment to make some repairs. What other constitutional amendments can you postulate? Could you think of one, for instance, for term limits? Would you go for something like that?
Sure.
What other ones? And, sir, Mr. Bestwick, which ones would you postulate? Mr. Shapiro, could you?
Do you want me to go first? Okay. Well, I think there are several that we can look at from today. I mean, we've got to take those amendments to the Constitution and follow them. The 10th Amendment, for one thing, we ought to rejuvenate the 10th Amendment. We need to make sure that people understand that those powers that are not granted specifically in the Constitution to the federal government belong to us. That's what's happening right now with our education system. They're trying to take over the Texas education system. They want common core curriculum to be sent from on high, from Washington, D.C., to tell Texas what to teach their students. It's preposterous. I told them the day that one of their bureaucrats in Washington knows what's going on in the McKinney Independent School District in the classroom of Mrs. Smith, then I'll let them have control over our state. It's impossible right now. And they've got to recognize that this has got to change. We're not going to sit back and watch it happen. That's one thing. The EPA is another thing. The unemployment compensation. I mean, you name it. We have gotten into a fix because the federal government has decided to run the state. And it's unacceptable.
Thank you.
Okay. I interpreted your question as the Texas Constitution and one of, but you're talking about the U.S. Constitution. I would add one word to the First Amendment, which is the word economics. We need a separation of economics and state. And that's what's needed. And that would have a dramatic impact on everything that has flowed from Washington, because they could no longer be regulating all of these other things. It would be a strengthening of the Interstate Commerce Clause, which has been completely misinterpreted throughout the years. That the regulation, that's Article 1, Section 8, talks about making regular commerce. That means making it fair and no tariffs between states. Well, that's what's been used to justify Obamacare. That's what will be used to justify Obamacare and everything else that has come down from most of the states. And I think at the state level, what the senator and myself need to do is we need to use tools such as nullification and interposition to potentially block these things from happening in the state of Texas. We have some of the tools available to us, and we just won't know until we test them out in courts.
Thank you. We have a question over here.
Yes, are you opposed to Obama's Race to the Top school program?
Yes, sir.
And if so, why?
Yes, sir, I am. It's got strings attached to it you wouldn't believe. If we sit back and just let Washington run our schools, we are foolish. We know best what our our students need locally. Local control is a #1 issue in my opinion. And what Obama has done with Arne Duncan's help, who's the education Commissioner of Education, is to put strings attached to what that money is. And we were the only state, along with Alaska, that said, no thanks, we don't want your money. And I'll give you a little side note to that, which is really interesting. I was at a national conference on education, and I was sitting there with a bunch of people who were asking me why we didn't take the money, why we didn't want the money. And I said, we don't want the strings attached to it. And period. And they said, you know, we've been thinking maybe we shouldn't have been looking at it either. So there's a lot of buyer's remorse going on right now.
I would go one step farther, and that is to say, well, why haven't we rejected No Child Left Behind too? Because that was the first intrusion of the feds into our classroom in the States, and we needed to stop it back then. But we've allowed these in certain aspects to come into the classroom when there's a Republican in office, but when there's a Democrat in office, now we throw up our flags and say, hey, listen, maybe we ought to look at this differently. You can make arguments again. I'm not disputing, once again, the intent of these laws. It's just that they get in the way, and that once they take an inch, they take a mile. And so I believe the beginnings of Obama's education program have its roots in George Bush's No Child Left Behind.
Right here. I guess this is for Senator Shapiro. If you ask the Washington politicians what's the matter with Afghanistan, they all say if they need to inject the rule of law and then everything will be great there. Well, those same politicians in Washington, they've abandoned the United States Constitution, and that's the highest law in the land, so they've abandoned the rule of law in our own country, and they may be welcome to take their own advice. John Locke said that wherever law ends, tyranny begins. So would you be willing to do nullification and sovereignty resolutions to protect the Texans?
Yes, of course.
I already made my answer clear, so yes, I agree.
Okay, turn right.
Okay, my question is for Ed,
Yes.
and I'd also like for the Senator to comment on it also. Under your issue, Ed, one of your issues, Ed, was the war on drugs. It says unwinnable, personal responsibility should control. I don't think people have that kind of responsibility, but I'd like to hear your.
Yeah, and that is a key difference, clearly, between myself and the Senator on this. I think that people do need to take personal responsibility, and that, of course, means that any crime that's committed under the influence of drugs should be prosecuted to the full extent. And there's no excuses. So if you kill somebody with your automobile while you're drunk, you go to jail for murder. So that we can't have any of these lesser included offenses for these type things. Now, that said, drug legalization is a libertarian position. It's way down on my list. Way down on the list. We've got to significantly reduce the size of the Texas government. Then that would be my priority, first and foremost. So yes, it's a position, but again, it's not the first thing that I'm going to do is go down and propose some kind of a drug law. I think we should not only balance the budget, but reduce the budget first. And I think that's the other side, that which is unseen on the drug side too, the case too. The amount of money that has been spent on this is so incredibly high. It's $40 billion, annually at the state and federal level. So if that is something that we can begin to reduce, I think there's ways that we can look at that.
Well, you can tell by the look on my face that I am in total opposition to what he believes. I happen to believe that government ought to have limited roles, but one of those limited roles is to be able to protect children and protect people. And in my view, if we allow the decriminalization of drugs in the state of Texas, if we don't put penalties, we are not doing well in the fight on the war on drugs, but it's a lot of outside sources and responsibilities that have caused it. We must stand strong and believe in the things that we hold dear, and our families and our family values are one of those. And drugs entering into families and the lives of people that we care about is unacceptable.
one more bit of housekeeping, commissioners, please